obviously we still live in this world where, you know, money matters and profit matters, and we're talking about a lot of soft and fuzzy kind of stuff. And, you know, maybe someone just wouldn't be bought into this notion that, well, we do count people, people don't count. Like, what might you, how might you enlighten someone about this, or maybe bring them to seeing it from a different perspective? What are some of the things that you find yourself going to your bag of tricks when you're having conversations like this?
And I would just go back to my power angle, and that, you know, that we are the source of creation here on this planet. And if we evolve ourselves, we literally, because life happens through us, create a new life experience, create new opportunities, new challenges, new resources, new ways of, because we simply have new ideas that blossom as a result of these greater aspirations and our greater consciousness. So for me, even though that sounds very esoteric, it's just so real and tangible, and leaders can experience it for real in their lives, that sort of thing is going to have a ripple effect at some point. And people suddenly say, okay, yep, life is happening through me. It's like Mahatma Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world. We actually all have to do this individually. And especially leaders running large corporations and running nations, etc., and running global organizations, because they're holding a lot of power, positional power as opposed to personal power.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's where I go to.
I probably build on what Antoinette is saying there. I think there's an element of role modeling, you know, as you said there, and, you know, being the change. And I know these words we're talking about, being authentic and vulnerable, but just leading in that way, embodying it yourself and what you do. And that sparks, you know, curiosity for people to come and have conversations and, you know, share the learning, share the mistakes, share how you want to show up in the world, the difference you want to make personally. And I think that invites some curiosity.
When I was, Jeff, when I was preparing for today, just thinking about it really, and not that I prepared volumes or anything like that, but I don't know if any of you know of the work of Fritjof Capra. He wrote a couple of books called The Tao of Physics and The Turning Point. He actually wrote them 40 years ago. And I'm rereading The Turning Point now because I did it when I was in university. And it's so interesting reading it, because talk about predicting the future. I mean, he nailed it, because he's a physicist by background. And he said, look, physics has reached the point where we've realized that ultimately you cannot reduce every single element of the world, right? Not just of nature, but everything. You cannot reduce it down completely. That's what they discovered when in the early 20th century when they were doing work in physics. And I'm not a scientist at all, but so I'm not going to attempt to even describe what they discovered, except to say that the ultimate discovery was that the whole reductionist, mechanistic, you know, kind of approach to the world will only get you so far, but it misses the kinds of things that Antoinette, I know, has been working on and talking about in terms of a systemic understanding of the world, a holistic understanding of the world. It misses that. It misses the interconnection between things. So I actually think, yes, totally agree that we can all do our piece and play our role, but I do think part of what we need to push for is a change in our education systems to talk about that. Because, you know, let's be honest here, it is seen as wishy-washy. You know, it's like the classic, my children are into their teens now, it's the classic parental reaction, you know, are you going to go and do arts, or are you going to go and do science and get a job, you know, or you're going to do accounting and get a job? It's that moment where you have to decide as a person and say, no, I'm totally good with you doing arts because that's going to bring out the best in you if that's what you really want to do. But being comfortable with that, because that is a whole different way of looking at the world not being possible to reduce down and count everything, and the only value in things is money. But I actually think that goes right back to, we call it national school, let's say primary school, elementary school level, where you're teaching children to see the world as interconnected, rather than to see it that you can break everything down and count everything, because ultimately that leads to the kind of situation we've had over the last number of years. So sorry for speaking for so long, but I'm very passionate about changing that whole way of looking at the world, and I think it starts at a very young age.
I think that's a really great point, actually.
It's also where my passion lies, is in education. I left education in the States because of back in 1999, because of some of the decisions made and how we were assessing actual learning and experience and growth. And it wasn't in a way that was actually benefiting the students. And I think that there's so much more that needs to be changed around how we educate our youth, as well as how we keep educating our adults. And that there's this idea that we need to continue to flourish and grow. And we don't just stop because we've become 30 or middle-aged or had kids, or now we're grandparents, so we're done evolving. And, it is a continuous pattern, and we need to embrace that and allow others to grow as they need to.
Yeah. And how we measure it as well, Mindy, you're really making me think now here, if you think of, and Wei, you brought it up earlier, if you think of how we measure academic progress or in school, when do we ever say, well, actually, you know what? Yeah, Dennis isn't great at maths, but he's a good person, or he's inclusive. I've seen him including the other children, the children who are different or less popular, or whatever words you want to use. What if we started that being our measure in our education systems from an early age, rather than saying, well, he got 95% in this and 38% in that, whatever it is. So I don't know, I'd welcome others to come in on that, but you're really sparking my thinking, not just about education, but how we measure education.
Education is a very interesting topic. I guess I am one from, because I grew up partly in Asia, that I present the topic in a much more grander scale, because when my son was looking at schools, and same topic, right? He loves music and he likes video games. I said, do you like your lifestyle, or do you like to kind of, sit in a box or do something creative? And it is challenging, because, he decided to go into computers, and I said, this degree is only going to last you for maybe 5-6 years, right? Because after your first job, you become a senior programmer. The Chinese programmers are going to code twice as fast as you, and you just better look for something else. Right? And that's kind of the dynamics of this world. And it's the challenge, because you're not only educating for what your singular purpose is, just you kind of have to see where you want to position yourself in this world. And there's not a right answer on this thing, but it is a very intriguing, because the rest of the world, if you look at it, westernized world, are not very STEM focused. If you look at, where all the PhDs and the scientists, they're all coming from Asia, India, and so forth. So, and there's always say that there's this discussion of the brain drain and so forth. So there's got to be something in the mix, and I'm not, by the time they're 30, everybody's just about as smart as anybody else. I'll say that. But, from the time when they're 17, you look at, Asian or Indian student who's come from, that level of training, they're into like graduate school. I had a boss that just said, I breezed through Columbia because the stuff I had to do as a PhD, I did in high school. So in terms of, so it just, obviously it was cream of the cream, but it is intriguing when we discuss education and how we position education from a practical perspective, or from, living a good, and part of it, the practicality does contribute to the good life, so to speak, or the life that you want to lead. So anyway, I don't have answers. I just, want to add the additional dimension.
Thank you. Yeah.
I might jump in if that's okay and add to that. And I think we talked about what defines organizational success, but then I think we bring it down to what defines individual success in life as well. And I might quote one part of a conversation I had with Tom Griffin the other day. He referred me to a book, A Good Way to Die. I don't know if anyone's read that, but one of the quotes was from a person who worked in palliative care. And it was the biggest regret people had on their deathbed was, I wish I spent less time worrying about what people thought of me and more time just being me. Yeah. And if I think we started with the end in mind, then it gives everyone permission to, what do we value if you are inclusive, as you said there, Dennis, as opposed to, hey, you got this great score. So I think if we go back and reframe it that way.
There's another interesting topic there that's just sparks off that conversation, Ronan, about, you know, my only job is to be me, really. And then people start to wonder who they are in their, you know, midlife. And because they go through, or they potentially sleepwalk through national school, going through the motions without ever being taught, what is it that you like? What is it that makes you unique rather than what makes you all the same? You know, whether it's uniforms and grades and all working at the same pace, doing the same thing every day. So I wonder what the world would look like if we educated our children to kind of value what is unique about them and to understand what feeds their soul and what drains their batteries, and really just to understand themselves and their own energies, so that when they do create a life for themselves, they understand what they're looking for, that they don't have just this, like we were talking about again, there's like, I must get a job and I must get money to fund my lifestyle. That's about as much as they come out of school with, right?
And to value difference as well, Joanne. Sorry, Antoinette, go ahead.
I beg your pardon. So I think that's happening today, right? Because we've got the Me Too movement, we've got the Black Lives Matter movement, we've got all these movements in the world that show us health, education, social systems, justice system, all of it is completely flawed. There's systemic bias, you know, entrenched in those cultures. So it's almost the technology is giving us the transparency that's exposing all this stuff, which is, I think, why we've got this great sense of disorder in the world that the pandemic is now actually giving us a bit of pause for in terms of reflection for thought. So I think it's all starting to come out of the wash, and that's where the leadership capacity to hold this mega wash of pain that people have suffered for their entire lifetimes, because, you know, unless you're, and I think even, you know, the most upright white heterosexual male, look at Jeff, has also suffered in relation to the corporate environment, etc. So, you know, we've all been trapped in the system, and the system has come off its rails and literally is disrupting now. Lots of politics, you know, France, yellow jackets, Brexit. This disruption is phenomenal. So for me, if we don't have larger visionary leaders who can hold the whole, we're just going to tip into chaos, and it's going to get a lot worse than it gets better.
Yeah.
You know, and things like universal basic income, an entire sort of new way of thinking about health. The food chain is completely toxic. You know, the supermarkets are full of plastic. So even every element of our lives are completely coming apart. You know, if we just keep on transposing it, extending it.
There's two quick thoughts related to the last 2 points. Actually, Joanne, I think definitely totally agree with you. People valuing their own differences a lot more, and valuing difference in others as well. I'd have to say that, being on this and working with Special Olympics for the last 10 years, you know, we're so quick to use difference in a negative way and to highlight how someone is different and therefore somehow lesser.
Talk about how we tolerate difference.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like the language again is a huge thing, you know. So embracing it rather than tolerating it, and seeking it as well, I think is a really interesting journey to go on. And then Antoinette, the one thing that very quick funny story. I had a job years ago where someone kept blaming the system, and eventually it was one particular incident, and it was to do with a form that had to be filled out. And I said, well, I have to say, and I was actually the head of the team at the time, and I said, look, I'm actually the system, and because I designed that form. So if it needs to be improved or changed, no problem. Let's talk about that. And I do think it's incumbent on all of us, because systems are hard to get our heads around. I find them very hard to get my head around and to get all the connections. So I do think it's incumbent on me as a leader, and any of us, hopefully, to try and break it down for people, to say, look, when we say systems or we talk about this, here's some examples and here's ideas for how we could try and and break it apart a bit, because it's only going to come apart over a very long period of time, hopefully not too long, but helping people to get under the skin of the system, I think is a big role that we can play.